Kamala Harris sits down for a major TV interview, and her Republican challenger Donald Trump continues on the attack. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Calebs filling in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The U.S. Vice President and now Democratic Party presidential nominee Kamala Harris has given her first major TV interview since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race. Harris has been under pressure to do so for weeks from her Republican opponent Donald Trump, and she talked with CNN on Thursday. We begin with this report from CGTN's Owen Fairclough.
Kamala Harris had been under pressure to face media questions ever since she became the Democratic candidate last month, and now the nominee. And on Thursday, the vice president sat down with her running mate Tim Walz for CNN.
Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And we have got to get a deal done.
Harris navigating crucial topics such as the war between Israel and Hamas and answering critics who claim she doesn't support the former enough. Harris was also asked to explain U-turning on her opposition against drilling for natural gas, known as fracking. Pennsylvania, a crucial swing state, has the country's second largest natural gas reserves.
As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
And Harris also had to address the U.S. southern border, a polarizing issue driving Republican claims that Democrats are too soft on immigration.
I believe there should be consequence. We have laws that have to be followed and enforced that address and deal with people who cross our border illegally.
Harris's Republican opponent Donald Trump reacted to her interview while campaigning in another key state, Michigan.
She didn't look like a leader to me, I'll be honest.
And if Harris is moving to the center to try to win these battleground states, Trump appears to be doing the same.
And what we're going to do is, for people that are using IVF, which is fertilization, the government is going to pay for it.
Trump's new proposal aimed at heading off complaints that the Republican-dominated Supreme Court's ending the federal right to abortion is limiting access to IVF treatment. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Okay, we have a lot to get to and a great panel to talk through all of this. And joining me now, Imani. She is an associate professor of digital storytelling at the George Washington University. Also with us from Miami is political analyst Jadan Horyn. He's joining the discussion from Southern California, Spencer Critchley. He was a campaign advisor to former President Barack Obama. And with us, too, is analyst and political commentator Rina Shah. I want to thank all of you. Imani, I want to start with you. I think it's difficult to find anybody who would say that this race isn't going to come down to a handful of swing states and also the independent voters. A lot of pressure on Harris and Walz to sit down and talk about the issues. This was a much hyped and much watched interview. How do you think she did?
Well, again, thank you for having me back. As I said last week, chosen media, and she chose. She went with CNN. She went with kind of a middle-of-the-road platform and a network. And I think she did a really great job of laying out her policies. I know a lot of time we talk about the performance of politics, but this interview was strategic. She laid out logistically exactly what her viewpoints and stances are as vice president and what she's going to continue to do and prioritize as president of the United States.
Jadan, a New York Times opinion page said that Harris certainly didn't hurt herself, but she didn't really help herself as well. I want to get you to weigh in on this because she's been under pressure from, of course, Donald Trump and the GOP, who are accusing her of changing her stance on major issues such as fracking, trying to get oil and gas out of shale. And that's going to be incredibly important in Pennsylvania, a very important swing state. She didn't choose the popular Democratic governor there to be her running mate, so that state is obviously going to be very important to her. I want to get your thoughts. Do you think that she has been flip-flopping, telling people what they want to hear?
Yeah, I think it's really important to assess any candidate from their record and their rhetoric. And in the case of Vice President Harris, there are a few questions that voters have, and it's not just Republicans, but it's really independent voters too. And it's if she's the last person in the room during the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal, what responsibility does she have for the poor decisions being made, and why has no one been fired in relation to that debacle? If she was the one that was responsible for or not the border, why were the issues exacerbated under the Biden-Harris administration, and why are those solutions suddenly surfaced now that she is the nominee? And I think finally, when it comes to whether it's flip-flopping or really a question of enforcing the policies of her, of the sitting president, is she going to be the one that cast the tie-breaking vote for the inflaming Inflation Reduction Act? Or is she going to be one who truly believes and understands monetary policy and how to lower those things? So again, it really comes down to the rhetoric has become centrist for both candidates. But what are the records? She is a lifelong politician with a long record of progressive positions. And so, that is something that voters have to take into account, no matter what her current rhetoric is.
Spencer, I want to get your reaction to that, because if you listen to what people are saying who support Harris, it's somebody who's been in office since 2020, and it's just the way that she has evolved on issues. And also, picking up on what Jadan said about the Inflation Reduction Act, because if you look at where the economy is now, a lot of people would argue it's certainly in a lot better position now than it was at the start of 4 years ago.
Oh my gosh, all of the economic measures are so much better than they were before. This is one of these pieces of conventional wisdom that proves very durable, that supposedly the economy was way better under Trump, when the reverse is true. But I think the larger point for me here is, and it's understandable why this happens, the moment we start to discuss Donald Trump and Kamala Harris as if these are two normal candidates for the presidency of the United States, we end up normalizing desperately abnormal behavior on the part of Donald Trump. I think of it as like we're trying to hire somebody to manage a factory, and one of these people has a background managing factories, and we can go over her resume and her record, and we can debate whether she's the right choice. And the other one is devoted to burning down the factory and has announced that fact. And that is the distinction we see here. Donald Trump, it is not hyperbolic to say, is an authoritarian in waiting who wants to tear down democracy to serve only himself. So that's the context of this discussion.
Rina, good to see you again as well. The Republicans are trying to paint Harris as an extremist, and some of the post-debate analysis, such as the Times I talked about, she came across as warm and relatable, something that apparently her team was really trying to push for. But she's also saying that she's going to have a Republican in her cabinet, at least seriously considering it, saying she wants to reach across the aisle. And you can look at any kind of poll these days and take away from it what you want, but a lot of polls do show her pulling away in some of the swing states and also having a national lead. Do you think indeed that the GOP, led by Trump, is losing the argument, trying to portray her as a dangerous liberal?
Well, in looking at last night's interview, I think it's actually a rather weak argument the Republicans are trying to make, that she's some sort of radical progressive and that she's far too liberal for this country, because last night's interview read perfectly for moderates. It was aimed at centrists, and it was brilliantly worded in the way that appeals to those folks that actually voted Republican in years past, using phrases such as wanting to bring back manufacturing to American shores, I'm paraphrasing here, but also talking about tax credits, not just for children, parents, but for small businesses. That was all talk that I heard from the Republican Party of yesteryear, and even that of Donald Trump's to some extent. But that was the kind of messaging we heard overwhelmingly from the Romney era of Republicans. So I think, again, it's a weak argument for these Republicans to try to say that she is just, again, too radical of a Democrat, way too liberal, the California type that they might not like. Because everything she said last night, almost, particularly with her comments on fracking and still holding her values on wanting to achieve a clean energy economy economy, a thriving one at that, while not banning fracking. That was a very salient point. Again, all aimed at getting to Republican hearts and minds. But I will say that one key phrase she used, diversity of opinion, in wanting to welcome a Republican member to her cabinet, that was quite interesting, because that is just not something I think Donald Trump would ever entertain.
Jadan, I want to get you to, I don't want everybody kind of gang up, but I'd like to get your take on all of this as well, because Harris, of course, part of the team, so she has to defend the Biden administration's record on the economy, with inflation, with the cost of living. We know groceries have gone up 21% since before the pandemic, and all other items about 19%. Inflation is getting tamed down. Everybody looking for the Fed to reduce interest rates next month, and that could perhaps offer some kind of economic boon in September, October, just before November elections. Want to get your thoughts on where things are now, and also Harris's choice of words, the diversity of opinion. I think a lot of people across the country are just fed up with this, the polar extremes on politics, and the fact that someone openly says, yes, I would consider putting someone who's not in my party in a cabinet. That seems like it could carry a lot of weight with voters right now.
That's a political thing that people do. Of course, Barack Obama had Secretary LaHood in his administration, who was a Republican. I believe he then also had a Republican Secretary of Defense after that. George W. Bush had Republicans in his administration. So it's not completely abnormal. There is a certain bridge that you do to the other side after you win. And that is something that she is obviously considering, because it is politically astute. But I will go back to something, and we really need to address this, and that is she is the sitting vice president, and she owns the successes and the failures of this current administration. And the year-over-year inflation rate, while it has gone down recently, is still higher by 20% than it was when they took office. So the question is not, is she better than Donald Trump? The question is, what responsibility does she own or bear for the Biden-Harris administration and fiscal and monetary policies that she now suddenly has the solution to? And then the other part that voters really need to ask, and this really isn't whataboutism. The question they have to ask is, if these are solutions that she can surface when she becomes president, why aren't they being done now? Joe Biden is still president of the United States. Democrats still have the ability to do this. Republicans are open to these ideas. Certainly the ones that are more populist will find broad consensus. So rather than use rhetoric on the campaign trail and talk to voters, why not get back to Washington and enact these now? That is the thing that, it doesn't matter if Donald Trump asked that. The media should be, and voters ultimately are. Whatever Donald Trump does is what a candidate running against another candidate is going to do. But she is sitting in that office now, and she has the ear of the sitting and current president of the United States. So let the solutions come now, not in January.
Okay, Imani, I want to talk just about the rhetoric that has been out there, because we heard what Donald Trump has said about the racial comments made about her. And last night, Dana Bash, the CNN anchor, asked a very pointed question about Harris, and I want you to listen to what she had to say. Basically saying it's the same old, tired playbook, and she wants to turn the page. I want to get your reaction to the way that she just answered that in one sentence and said, next question, please. Imani?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to play the clip. I think that it's really poignant that Kamala Harris has decided to obviously focus on not only policies, and even as the panelists mentioned, ahead of me, we're talking about, why isn't she, pushing policies forward and, now instead of waiting in January. And I think it's really important for us to remember the role of the vice president, which is to support the current president, and not necessarily push their own agenda. And so Kamala Harris, the fact that she's already broken all of the glass ceilings when it comes to being the first Black and South Asian American woman to hold this office. And I think what she's doing is really actually a very smart strategic tactic by focusing on, yes, her record and her rhetoric, as Jadan mentioned, but also the fact that she is not only, focusing on her race and or gender is something where we have a large swath of Republicans, but also just Americans who see her as quote unquote a DEI candidate. And she is someone who did not achieve her accomplishments on her own merit and her own right, but they were as a result of some aspect of her racial makeup and of her gender. So to say it is a tired playbook, because it is, to want to turn the page, which we should, and focus on, yes, the reality of her race, ethnicity, and gender is going to and continues to obviously be groundbreaking. But the reality is she has to stand on, and I think she is, standing on her policies, standing on her record, and ensuring that right now she is speaking to the American public as a presidential candidate, not as an attorney general, not as a vice president, not in any of these other political positions that she's held. But the reason why her rhetoric has changed, the reason why she is focusing on policies is because this is what you do when you become a presidential candidate.
Okay. Spencer, also, the issue was raised yesterday about the White House policy on Gaza and Israel and the Middle East, once again saying that the U.S. stands behind Israel, but there needs to be a ceasefire. There needs to be a way to end all the human suffering that's been going on in Gaza. But, there are still concerns about losing all-important Muslim American, Arab American votes in the important state of Michigan. If indeed there's no ceasefire before the election, what could that possibly do to that state, and how could that affect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz?
I think that most Americans, as polls show, and I agree with them, will be deeply disappointed if there isn't a ceasefire soon. And I think that this is an issue that Kamala Harris is signaling that she wants to be stronger with the Netanyahu administration than Joe Biden has been, at least publicly. And she has to be careful, of course, how strongly she signals that. While she still is the vice president, it is not her role to diverge from the president's foreign policy. I think in general, what she's saying on this issue is the right answer, not just politically, but in balancing the, first of all, ethical concerns here and all the many other competing priorities that go into a foreign policy. And the one area where I wish she could be a little bit more specific is what kind of specific pressure can be brought to bear on Netanyahu to stop the killings of civilians and injury to civilians in Gaza. I understand very well why she has to be careful about divulging details of sensitive negotiations and whatever kind of pressure might be being exerted behind the scenes. That said, I think the public, not just Palestinian Americans or Arab Americans, but all the many Americans who care deeply about this issue, not because they're against Israel, but because they believe all civilian life is precious, I think they deserve to hear a little bit more that separates the Biden-Harris administration from the Netanyahu administration, which I think is not only doing terrible damage in Gaza, but is doing grave damage to the state of Israel and its reputation as a liberal democracy.
Rina, abortion and reproductive rights, obviously a very big issue moving forward, and the Trump campaign concerned that it has been losing support among women. And we heard Trump talk about moving in the direction saying that either insurance or the government should pay for in vitro fertilization for couples who are struggling to have children. I want to get your reaction to the way he has, as Democrats would say, flip-flopped recently on this issue, trying to gain more support for women. But doesn't he also run the risk of losing that support from the far right, his Christian base there? And why do you think he's doing this at this hour?
Well, just in the past day, we've saw him lose some of the most ardent supporters of the anti-abortion movement. In particular, one young activist by the name of Lila Rose, she has said that pro-life evangelicals, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, should be under no obligation to support Trump because they are not happy with the things coming out of his mouth. And then you've got other American women like me who've come up in the Republican Party, but have always been pro-choice. And so the situation is complex for Trump. I think, to me, it's about trust. at the end of the day, look, I'm a mother. I can be anti-abortion for myself, but I'm pro-choice for other women because I think this is a really personal decision. And like the Republicans that I worked for when the Affordable Care Act was being crafted on Capitol Hill, the Obamacare, as it's been referenced, the talking point we used most back then was that no bureaucrat, no government elected official or otherwise belonged in the medical exam room between a doctor and a patient. And so Republicans now saying that, essentially states have every right to control women's bodies, that it's a completely antithetical argument to what the Republican Party says it's for, which it says it's for freedom. Instead, what you have is a lot of its folks saying they want to legislate with their holy book. So Trump is caught between a rock and a hard place, has been ever since the overturn of Roe. But back to the issue of trust, I don't think you can trust Trump to not enact a federal ban. And that's where a lot of American women are at. They don't want to feel like their rights are on the line, their bodily autonomy is on the line just because their state is choosing to do something. They want the assurance from whoever's in the White House next. The vast majority of American women, and we have empirical evidence backing the statement up that I'm making, the vast majority of American women want to see a codification of Roe. They want to see, they do not want a federal ban on abortion. They don't want to see these states do what they want to do and have it be different. They want, again, the protection to have access to reproductive care and the ability to terminate a pregnancy within a reasonable amount of time, a certain number of weeks, no late term, should they need it.
Okay, Jade, want to get your take on that. To what degree do you think that abortion, reproductive rights will be a major issue in November?
Yeah, it is absolutely a major issue. I think, there are a couple of things here that I really like to address that I think are really important. And that is, as both candidates run to the center, you see the divergence of party discipline on both sides. Senator Sanders out of Vermont had a op-ed where he, as a leftist, as a democratic socialist, is endorsing Kamala Harris' moderate policies, saying they're common sense. Meanwhile, on the pro-life right, you have the anti-abortion activists essentially throwing Donald Trump, after he did exactly what they wanted, off the cliff. So, there's a divergence here that will play out in the election. Now, in answer to your question, absolutely. Republicans have been fumbling this issue since the overturning of Roe. I think Trump himself is the one that is trying to thread this needle. And, he initially came to the conclusion that he would not or that he would oppose the current sitting law in Florida of 6 weeks, and announced that he would be for the amendment, and then apparently has now said that he is opposed to the amendment and to the existing law, which is, again, trying to have it both ways. Now, this is, again, a question of record and rhetoric. Donald Trump, for most of his adult life, has been pro-choice. And when he ran as a Republican, he told Republicans to trust him. And his record indicates they can. Why they're doing what they're doing now, and if they really want to take this election and hand it to someone who will absolutely categorically disagree and enact policies they do not agree with, I have no idea. But one final point, I will say that there will be no national abortion ban because there are not votes in this current Republican Party. And those that are still left believing in federalism do follow and understand that the Supreme Court has ruled that it is a state's issue. So, that is a talking point that we can use to scare people, but the chances of that happening and the Supreme Court upholding it are absolutely zero.
Okay, Spencer, I want to come to you real quick. Trump has a history of doing basically what he wants, and we saw that again on Monday at Arlington National Cemetery, where he and a number of his staff, including photographers, went into Section 60, an area of Arlington National Cemetery that has been reserved for mostly victims, soldiers, Marines, sailors who died in Afghanistan and Iraq. Took pictures there, also apparently had some kind of scuffle with a staff member there. A lot of blowback on this issue. And I've talked to a number of people who are vets, and it didn't go over well. To what degree do you think this is going to hurt Trump moving forward?
I think that it's all starting to pile up after 9+ years of this, and there have been a great many devoted Trump followers who have tried to deny the reality that's right in front of them, but at a certain point you can't. And generally what happens with authoritarians is they appear to be getting away with it until the moment they suddenly aren't. And then it goes very wrong very fast as all but their most fanatical followers abandon them. And I think that's what we're going to see with Trump. Based on history, it's inevitable. It's just a question of when, whether it happens before the election or not. Trump, of course, lied incredibly flagrantly to a reporter about this, claiming he had no idea there was any kind of political angle to his visit and that a video was being filmed and he was just there because he was asked to be there by some of the families. This, again, I think is how we normalize somebody who is the farthest thing from normal. I think that reporters need to stop pretending that it's worth paying any attention to any assertion Trump makes as if there's any chance that he's speaking honestly, because he's demonstrated literally tens of thousands of times that he is a pathological liar. And I think it would just be actual journalistic objectivity to have that reflected in the coverage. And if he makes an assertion, the default should be there should be some other third-party guarantor to back it up, because he cannot be trusted on any topic.
Imani, we're almost out of time. I really want to kind of end it with you, because when it was Biden against Trump, the GOP really had made some significant inroads to attracting African-American voters, some predicting as many as 20%. I was talking to the head of the NAACP in Georgia, who said right now people aren't going to get off the couch and vote for Biden because he made a lot of promises in 2020 that simply weren't kept. How has this changed, or has it changed at all?
I think what we're seeing in particular when it comes to all minority groups in the United States, but in particular looking at African Americans, that yes, you do have African Americans and Republicans. We are not a monolith like any other community, but the notion, the assertion that Donald Trump makes, in particular about him, now being a felon, and why that should be a factor that is appealing to African American voters, is not only insulting and absolutely ignorant, but the reality is he's not going to win over any voting bloc, but in particular African Americans, with the antics, with the continued pathological falsehoods and lies that he continues to spread, and focusing on, again, topics that are just stereotypical, disrespectful, and insulting.
Okay, I really want to thank you all. It's been a great panel, a great discussion, and you know what, 2 months left, so buckle up, everybody. I'm sure we'll have you back again to talk in the near future about this all-important race and where the nation goes in the next 4 years. Okay, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank everyone for watching yet another edition of The Heat.